War Captain Scarlog stood in the command center of Fortress Ironhold, the primary Orc stronghold established at the original portal site, and studied the tactical displays with growing frustration. 6 months of warfare on this alien world had taught him that humans were unlike any enemy the Ironjaw clan had faced in a millennium of conflict. "Report," he growled to Tech Shaman Grousel, whose cybernetic implants interfaced directly with their strategic analysis systems. "Losses continue to mount, War Captain. We have neutralized approximately 40,000 human military personnel, but our own casualties now number nearly 3,000 killed and wounded. More significantly, our equipment attrition rate is 15 times higher than projected." Scarlog's tusks gleamed in the artificial light as he bared them in frustration. 15 times? How is that possible? Human weapons are primitive projectile systems that should barely scratch our armor. The humans have adapted, War Captain. They no longer rely primarily on their conventional weapons. Instead, they employ technological countermeasures specifically designed to exploit vulnerabilities in our systems that we did not know existed. Grousel gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show a detailed analysis of recent combat encounters. Magnetic pulse weapons that disrupt our energy containment systems. Corrosive explosives that neutralize our armor alloys. Electronic warfare techniques that interfere with our communications and targeting systems. But how did they develop such countermeasures so quickly? Our intelligence suggested their technological development was centuries behind our own. That assessment was incomplete, War Captain. Human technology developed along different pathways than our own. Where we perfected energy weapons and defensive systems, they perfected kinetic weapons and electronic warfare. Where we developed magic-enhanced cybernetics, they developed purely technological solutions. They possess capabilities we never encountered during the 1,000-Year War because no one on Korthak ever developed them. Scarlog studied the tactical data with the eye of a veteran warrior who had survived countless battles by learning from his enemies. "Show me their deployment patterns." The display shifted to show human force distributions across the occupied territories. Instead of the mass formations and fortified positions that Orc doctrine expected, the humans had scattered into thousands of small units that operated independently, struck without warning, and vanished before retaliation was possible. "Cowards!" growled War Captain Crag, Scarlog's second-in-command. "They refuse to face us in honorable combat." "No," Scarlog said slowly, beginning to understand. "Not cowards. They are fighting the only war they can win. Look at this data. Every time we have engaged large human formations in direct combat, we have achieved total victory. But these small unit actions..." He manipulated the display to highlight recent harassment operations. "They are bleeding us slowly while avoiding decisive engagement. It is not the Orc way," Crag protested. "Warriors should meet their enemies face to face, strength against strength." "The Orc way," Scarlog replied with a hint of bitter humor, "resulted in our homeworld burning to ash and our entire race reduced to 20,000 survivors on an alien planet. Perhaps it is time to consider that the Orc way is not the only way." He turned to address the assembled war leaders of the Ironjaw clan. "Brothers, we came to this world as conquerors, expecting to face opponents who would fight as we have always fought. Instead, we face an enemy that refuses to play by the rules of warfare as we understand them. The question is, do we continue trying to force them into familiar patterns, or do we learn to fight their kind of war?" The War Council erupted in angry debate. Traditional Orc military doctrine emphasized personal combat, technological superiority, and the establishment of clear territorial control. The human approach, guerrilla warfare, technological improvisation, and asymmetric tactics, ran counter to everything the Ironjaw had learned in 1,000 years of conflict. "War Captain," interjected Shaman Urzoth, whose ancient voice carried the authority of centuries. "The humans have shown us something we have not seen since the early days of the 1,000-Year War. They have shown us how to be creative in our destruction. Speak plainly, Old One. In the first centuries of our Great War, when the clans were more evenly matched, victory often went to those who could think beyond conventional tactics. The Blood Fawn developed ambush techniques in the Crystal Peaks. The Iron Fist perfected siege warfare in the underground cities. The Sky Reavers learned aerial combat among the floating islands. Each clan adapted their fighting style to their environment and their enemies. Urzoth gestured toward the tactical displays showing human operations. These humans have done the same thing. They have looked at their strengths and weaknesses compared to ours, and they have developed a fighting style that maximizes their advantages while minimizing their vulnerabilities. If we are to defeat them, we must do the same. You're suggesting we abandon Orc military tradition? Crag asked incredulously. I am suggesting, Scarlog said, that we remember why Orc military tradition developed in the first place. To win wars. And right now, our traditions are losing us this war. He stood and began pacing, his mind working through the implications. Tech Shaman Grozzle, how long would it take to modify our equipment and tactics to counter human asymmetric warfare? Significant modifications could be implemented within 60 days, War Captain. But it would require fundamental changes to our operational doctrine. Smaller unit sizes, different equipment loadouts, new training regimens for troops accustomed to conventional warfare. And our strategic objectives? Would need to be adjusted. Instead of territorial conquest and direct confrontation, we would focus on eliminating human command structures, disrupting their supply networks, and forcing them into the kind of decisive engagements where our technological advantages remain significant. Scarlog nodded slowly. Do it. Begin immediate implementation of adaptive warfare protocols. I want our warriors trained in human-style tactics within 30 days. War Captain, protested Crag. This is not how Orcs fight. We are not skulking assassins or saboteurs. We are warriors. We are survivors. Scarlog corrected. And survivors do whatever is necessary to ensure the continuation of their people. The Ironjaw clan will adapt, or the Ironjaw clan will die on this alien world just as our ancestors died on Korthak. The War Council disbanded with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. For the first time in their history, the Orcs would fight a war using tactics learned from their enemies rather than tactics perfected against their traditional opponents. Within days, the changes began to show results. Orc patrol sizes dropped from squad strength to team strength. Their equipment loadouts shifted from heavy assault gear to stealth and reconnaissance systems. Most significantly, they began employing the same hit-and-run tactics that had made human resistance so effective. The first sign that the war had entered a new phase came when Morrison's squad attempted to repeat their successful harassment operation against another Orc patrol. They emerged from the storm drains expecting to find aliens moving in predictable patterns, using vulnerable equipment, and following established security protocols. Instead, they found nothing. "Where are they?" whispered Corporal Liu, scanning the empty street through his periscope. "Sensors showed a patrol passing through here 15 minutes ago. Maybe they changed their route," suggested Specialist Garcia. Morrison felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Something was wrong. The Orcs had been following the same patrol patterns for months, and sudden deviations were usually a sign of. The attack came from above. Orc warriors dropped from the rooftops on rappelling lines, their weapons already charging. But instead of the heavy plasma cannons they had carried for months, these Orcs wielded compact energy weapons designed for close-quarters combat. "Ambush!" Morrison shouted, diving for cover as energy bolts seared through the air around him. "They knew we were here!" The engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, half of Morrison's squad was dead, and the survivors were in full retreat through tunnels that no longer felt safe. The Orcs had anticipated their escape routes, their tactics, even their equipment. "Sierra 6 to Base Charlie," Morrison reported, his voice shaking. "Mission abort." "Say again, mission abort. The Orcs are using our own tactics against us." The war for Earth had just become infinitely more complicated. Colonel Camerton Amelia studied the after-action reports from across the Western Front with growing concern. In the past 2 weeks, human casualties had tripled while successful operations had dropped by 60%. The Orcs had stopped fighting like technologically superior conventional forces and started fighting like intelligent guerrilla warriors. "They're learning faster than we anticipated," she said to her assembled staff. "Every tactical innovation we develop, they counter within days. Every advantage we gain, they find a way to neutralize." Dr. Sarachin, still serving as the military's chief xenological advisor, looked up from her analysis of intercepted Orc communications. "Colonel, I think we've been approaching this wrong. We've been thinking of this as a military problem, but it's actually an evolutionary problem." "Explain." "The Orcs survived a 1,000-year war. Think about what that means in terms of natural selection. Any Orc alive today is descended from individuals who were capable of adapting to new threats, learning from enemies, and developing countermeasures for novel tactics. They're not just experienced warriors, they're the end result of a millennium-long breeding program for military adaptability." Major Williams consulted his tactical computer. "Dr. Chin is right, ma'am. Our analysis shows that Orc response time to new human tactics has been decreasing exponentially. They're not just learning, they're getting better at learning." Amelia felt a chill as the implication sank in. "You're saying we can't out-adapt them because adaptation is literally what they evolved to do?" "Exactly. Every time we develop a new approach, we're teaching them something about human tactical thinking. And they're using that knowledge to predict our next moves. So what do you recommend? Surrender?" Dr. Chin shook her head. "No, but we need to change our approach fundamentally. Instead of trying to out-adapt them, we need to force them to adapt to something that can't be countered through tactical innovation." "Such as?" "Politics." The room fell silent as everyone tried to process what the xenobiologist had just suggested. "Doctor," General Patterson said carefully, "the Orcs have shown no interest in diplomatic solutions. They're here to conquer Earth, not negotiate with it." "That's true," Dr. Chen replied. "But they're also refugees from a dying world. They need Earth to survive, which means they need to establish a sustainable long-term occupation. And sustainable occupation requires more than military victory, it requires some form of political accommodation with the conquered population." Amelia leaned forward, intrigued. "You're thinking about their post-conquest planning?" "Exactly. The Orcs are excellent warriors, but they're terrible administrators. They don't understand human society, human economics, or human psychology outside of military contexts. They can conquer our cities, but they can't run them." She pulled up a map showing Orc-controlled territories. "Look at what's happening in the occupied zones. Infrastructure is breaking down because they don't know how to maintain it. Agricultural production has dropped by 80% because they don't understand human farming techniques. Industrial output has stopped completely because they can't operate our manufacturing systems. The occupied territories are becoming economically unsustainable." Williams realized. "They're winning militarily but losing logistically. Which gives us a completely different kind of leverage," Amelia said, beginning to see the strategy. "We stop trying to defeat them militarily and start making their occupation economically and politically impossible." Dr. Chen nodded enthusiastically. "The Orcs expected to fight a war and then enjoy the spoils of victory. Instead, they're discovering that Earth only functions if humans are willing to make it function. Every day their occupation continues, their new world becomes less livable." "You're talking about strategic non-cooperation," General Patterson said. "But that requires coordination across the civilian population, and most civilians are either dead, refugees, or hiding underground." "Then we bring them out of hiding," Amelia said, her mind racing through the possibilities. "We shift from a strategy focused on military resistance to one focused on civilian resistance. Make the Orcs realize that they can conquer Earth, but they can't make Earth work for them." Over the next 72 hours, Amelia's team developed what would become known as the soft war strategy. Instead of attacking Orc military forces directly, human resistance would focus on making the occupied territories ungovernable. Phase 1. Amelia explained to the network of resistance leaders assembled via encrypted communication. Information warfare. We flood the occupied zones with propaganda explaining to both humans and orcs that cooperation with the occupation only delays the inevitable collapse of Earth's ecosystem. She pulled up economic projections that her team had developed with help from the surviving members of the Federal Reserve and the Department of Agriculture. Without human cooperation, the orcs can maintain their current force levels for approximately 18 months before facing critical shortages of food, fuel, and manufactured goods. We make sure everyone, including the orcs, knows this timeline. Phase 2, Strategic Disruption. Instead of attacking orc forces, we target the infrastructure they depend on to maintain their occupation. Power plants, transportation networks, communication systems. But we do it in ways that look like system failures rather than sabotage. Phase 3, Political Fragmentation. The orcs are a single clan, but human society is much more complex. We exploit regional, cultural, and economic differences to create resistance networks that the orcs can't predict or counter because they don't understand the social structures they're built on. The strategy was implemented gradually, starting with carefully coordinated infrastructure failures that made the occupied territories increasingly difficult to govern. Power grids failed during peak demand periods. Transportation networks experienced cascading delays and breakdowns. Communication systems suffered from mysterious interference that seemed to be caused by solar activity rather than sabotage. The orcs responded as Amelia had predicted, by trying to impose military solutions on civilian problems. They deployed troops to guard power plants, established martial law in transportation hubs, and used their own communication systems to replace human networks. But each military response only made the underlying problems worse. Orc guards at power plants didn't understand how to maintain the equipment they were protecting. Martial law in transportation hubs brought commerce to a complete halt. Replacement communication systems couldn't interface with the human technology that ran everything else. Within 6 months, the occupied territories were experiencing a humanitarian crisis that affected orcs and humans equally. Food shortages led to rationing. Fuel shortages grounded most orc transportation. Equipment failures left both species without power, water, or medical care. Sir, Tech Shaman Grozzle reported to War Captain Scarlog. Our analysts project total infrastructure collapse within 90 days if current trends continue. Scarlog studied the reports with growing alarm. How is this possible? We have defeated every human military force, conquered every strategic objective, eliminated every organized resistance network. The humans are not resisting us directly, War Captain. Instead, they are allowing their own civilization to collapse, calculating that we will suffer more from the collapse than they will. Madness. They are destroying their own world to spite us. No, War Captain. They are betting that we need their world more than they need to cooperate with us. And according to our resource projections, they appear to be correct. For the first time since landing on Earth, Scarlog began to wonder if military conquest was sufficient to achieve the Ironjaw clan's ultimate objective, the survival and prosperity of his people on a new world. The meeting took place in the ruins of the Seattle Space Needle, neutral ground that both sides could reach without traversing heavily defended territory. Colonel Kamet and Amelia arrived with a small escort of soldiers and civilian advisors. War Captain Scarlog came with an honor guard of veteran warriors and Tech Shaman Grozzle. It was the first face-to-face contact between senior leadership of both species since the disastrous first encounter 8 months earlier. War Captain, Amelia said formally, her voice carrying none of the hatred that both sides had earned through months of brutal conflict. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Scarlog studied the human colonel with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating potential prey. Despite her small stature compared to orc physiology, she carried herself with the confidence of a seasoned warrior. Her uniform was worn but well-maintained, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence he had learned to respect in human military leaders. Colonel Amelia, he replied in heavily accented but clear English. Your reputation precedes you. The architect of the human resistance that has made this world difficult for my people to govern. I prefer to think of myself as a realist, War Captain. We both understand that the current situation is unsustainable for everyone involved. Tech Shaman Grozzle leaned forward to whisper in Scarlog's ear, her cybernetic implants analyzing everything from Amelia's heart rate to the chemical composition of her perspiration. She speaks truth, War Captain. No deception in her biorhythms. Your mechanical intuition is unnecessary, old friend, Scarlog replied. Any leader skilled enough to frustrate the Ironjaw clan for 8 months is not fool enough to lie during our first diplomatic contact. He gestured for his warriors to stand down, a signal that the meeting would proceed under traditional Orc rules of parley. Speak, Colonel. What terms do the humans offer? No terms, War Captain. Questions. Specifically, what do your people actually want from Earth? The directness of the query caught Scarlog off guard. Months of warfare had conditioned him to expect human duplicity and misdirection. We want survival. Our homeworld is dead. Earth is our only hope for the continuation of the Ironjaw clan. Survival I understand. But does survival require the conquest and subjugation of the entire human species? It requires control of sufficient resources to sustain our population. Humans have demonstrated that they cannot be trusted to voluntarily provide such resources. Amelia nodded thoughtfully. Because we attacked you when you first arrived. Your military leaders chose to respond to our presence with violence rather than negotiation. This forced us to establish control through conquest rather than cooperation. A fair point. But War Captain, surely your analysts have informed you that conquest without cooperation is proving economically unfeasible? Scarlog's tusks gleamed as he bared them in what might have been amusement. Your people's willingness to destroy their own infrastructure rather than see it serve Orc interests has been instructive. We had not encountered such tactics during the 1,000-Year War. Because the other species on your homeworld were fighting for the same resources you were. Earth is different. Humans have built a civilization based on voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit. When that cooperation is replaced by coercion, the entire system breaks down. Dr. Chen stepped forward from Amelia's group. War Captain, when we first met, you said that conquest need not mean extinction of the conquered. That perhaps humans could be useful allies. Do you still believe that? Scarlog studied the xenobiologist who had attempted the first peaceful contact. Dr. Chen. I remember you. You showed wisdom and courage. Unfortunately, your species chose a different path. My species chose to defend itself against what appeared to be an invasion. But the circumstances that led to that choice no longer exist. We now understand what you want. The question is whether what you want can be achieved through cooperation rather than conquest. Explain. Amelia pulled out a tablet and activated a holographic display. Current status of Orc-controlled territories. Infrastructure degradation across all sectors. Agricultural production down 85%. Industrial output down 90%. Transportation networks functioning at 15% capacity. Power generation down 60%. She manipulated the display to show projected trends. At current rates, the occupied territories will be uninhabitable within 4 months. Your forces will face critical shortages of food, fuel, and manufactured goods within 2 months. You state the obvious, Colonel. What solution do you propose? Partnership. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Orc and human leaders alike stared at Amelia as if she had suggested something impossible. Partnership? Scarlog repeated. Between conqueror and conquered? Between refugees and natives. War Captain, your people need a home. Earth can provide that home, but only if Earth continues to function as a living world rather than a conquered territory. That requires human cooperation, which requires human incentives to cooperate. What incentives could we possibly offer a species we have defeated in combat? Survival, Dr. Chen said simply. War Captain, you've been thinking of this as a zero-sum conflict. Either Orcs control Earth or humans control Earth. But what if the answer is that both species control Earth, together? Tech Shaman Grozzle's cybernetic systems processed the proposal with mechanical precision. Theoretical possibility exists for symbiotic coexistence. Orc military capabilities provide planetary defense against external threats. Human technological infrastructure provides sustainable resource base for expanded population. A fascinating theory, Scarlog said carefully. But humans have proven themselves resistant to Orc authority. Because we've been treated as conquered enemies rather than potential partners, Amelia replied. War Captain, what would happen if instead of demanding submission, you offered alliance? Alliance implies equality. Orcs are the superior military force. In military terms, yes. But in every other metric that matters for long-term survival on Earth, agricultural production, industrial manufacturing, infrastructure maintenance, technological innovation, humans have proven superior. Neither species can thrive alone on this world. Together, we might both prosper. Scarlog was silent for long minutes, weighing the implications. Everything in Orc culture demanded that military victory be followed by subjugation of the defeated enemy. But everything in his practical experience as a leader told him that subjugation was failing to achieve his people's actual objectives. What specific terms would such a partnership involve? Joint governance of shared territories. Orc military protection in exchange for human technological and agricultural support. Gradual integration of Orc refugees into human society with full rights and responsibilities. Shared research into terraforming technologies that could make Earth more suitable for both species. And if humans prove unwilling to accept Orc authority in military matters? Then you retain the right to resume conquest, Amelia said bluntly. War Captain, we're not asking you to abandon your military advantages. We're asking you to use them differently. Instead of occupying human territory, defend human territory. Instead of conscripting human labor, employ human cooperation. Instead of extracting Earth's resources, help us develop them sustainably. Scarlog looked around at his warriors, then at the human delegation, then at the ruined city spreading out below them. 8 months of warfare had proven that both species were capable of tremendous destruction. The question was whether they were also capable of tremendous creation. I will consider your proposal, he said finally. But such a decision cannot be made by war leaders alone. It must be approved by the full council of the Ironjaw clan. And it must be approved by human governments as well, Amelia replied. This isn't a decision that either of us can make unilaterally. How long do we have? Amelia consulted her tactical computer. Current crisis projections suggest total infrastructure collapse within 60 days. If we're going to try partnership instead of mutual destruction, we need to start within 2 weeks. Then we have 2 weeks to convince two species to abandon everything they believe about warfare, conquest, and survival, Scarlog said with grim humor. It should be interesting. As the two delegations prepared to return to their respective territories, Dr. Chen approached War Captain Scarlog one final time. War Captain, there's something I want you to understand. Humans are capable of tremendous loyalty and cooperation, but only when we feel that our partners respect our autonomy and dignity. If this alliance is to work, it must be built on mutual respect, not just mutual necessity. Scarlog considered this carefully. Dr. Chen, in the 1,000-Year War, alliances were temporary conveniences between enemies who planned to betray each other at the first opportunity. What you describe sounds different. It is different. It's what humans call friendship. Perhaps it's time for both our species to learn something new. The fate of two worlds now hung in the balance of a single question. Could natural enemies become lasting allies? 1 year later, Colonel Kemeton and Amelia stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, watching Orc and human construction crews work together to build humanity's first interplanetary defense platform. The sight still amazed her. Beings who had been killing each other with systematic efficiency now collaborated with the same dedication they had once brought to warfare. Status report, Colonel? Asked War Captain Scarlog, approaching from the command center where he had been coordinating patrol schedules with the Unified Fleet Command. Construction is ahead of schedule, Amelia replied. The heavy lifting platforms you designed are proving incredibly efficient for moving the large structural components. And the human engineers' precision manufacturing techniques are producing components that interface perfectly with Orc power systems. Scarlog nodded with satisfaction. The station they were building would house both Orc warriors and human technicians, serving as the first line of defense against the possibility that other refugee clans might someday follow the Iron Jaw to Earth. It was a symbol of cooperation born from necessity, but strengthened by genuine mutual respect. Any word from the terraforming project in Australia? Dr. Chen's team reports success with the atmospheric processors. They've managed to create environmental conditions that are comfortable for both species across a 200 square mile test area. If the results hold, we should be able to expand Orc settlements without displacing human populations. The integration hadn't been easy. Human governments had initially been skeptical of any arrangement that didn't involve complete Orc withdrawal from Earth. Orc clan leaders had struggled with the concept of voluntary cooperation rather than imposed dominance. But the alternative, mutual destruction through continued warfare, had motivated both species to find workable compromises. "Colonel, I have been thinking about the next phase of our alliance," Scarlog said, his tone suggesting careful consideration. "My people possess knowledge of 17 other worlds where refugee populations might attempt settlement. With combined human technology and Orc military capabilities, we could establish a network of defensive outposts to monitor potential threats." Amelia turned to study her unlikely partner. Over the months of working together, she had learned to read Orc body language and vocal patterns. Scarlog was proposing something that went far beyond Earth's defense. He was envisioning a multi-world alliance built on the principles they had discovered here. "You're talking about becoming explorers instead of conquerors. I am talking about ensuring that no other world faces the choice between destruction and subjugation that nearly destroyed both our peoples. An interesting evolution for a species that spent 1,000 years perfecting the art of warfare." Scarlog's tusks gleamed in what had become familiar as his expression of amusement. "Colonel, your species spent centuries perfecting the art of competition, but you learned to value cooperation when competition proved inadequate to your needs. Perhaps Orcs can learn the same lesson." From the construction site below, the sound of human and Orc voices joined in coordinated effort drifted up to the observation deck. Work songs in both languages, rhythm patterns that had emerged naturally from crews who had learned to function as integrated teams rather than separate species. "War Captain, I have a confession to make," Amelia said. "When I first developed the resistance strategies that slowed your conquest, I was thinking only about how to hurt your people enough to make you leave. I never imagined we might end up as partners." "And I," Scarlog replied, "came to Earth expecting to find primitive aliens who would either submit or be eliminated. I never imagined finding equals worth respecting." Dr. Chen's voice crackled over the communication system. "Colonel Amelia, War Captain Scarlog, please report to the Xenobiology lab. We've made a discovery that you need to see immediately." 15 minutes later, they stood in the state-of-the-art laboratory that served as the centerpiece of human-Orc scientific collaboration. Dr. Chen was manipulating a holographic display that showed genetic analysis data. "We've been studying the long-term effects of human-Orc cooperation on both species," she explained. "The psychological profiles, the social adaptations, the technological innovations that emerge from combining our different approaches to problem-solving. And?" Amelia prompted. "And we're documenting evolutionary changes in both species. Nothing dramatic, but measurable adaptations that suggest long-term exposure to interspecies cooperation is actually altering human and Orc development patterns." She highlighted specific data points on the display. "Humans working closely with Orcs are developing enhanced spatial reasoning and mechanical aptitudes. Orcs working closely with humans are developing improved pattern recognition and analytical thinking. Both species are becoming more than they were separately." Scarlog studied the data with the intensity he had once brought to military planning. "Dr. Chen, are you suggesting that cooperation between our species is driving evolutionary advancement?" "I'm suggesting that the combination of human adaptability and Orc innovation creates a hybrid approach to challenges that neither species could achieve alone. The defensive station you're building, the terraforming techniques you've developed, the space exploration technologies you're designing, all of them represent capabilities that exceed what either species possessed independently." Amelia felt a chill of recognition. "We're not just allies. We're becoming something new. Something unprecedented in the history of either species, Dr. Chen confirmed. A truly symbiotic relationship between two intelligent species that enhances both rather than diminishing either. The implications were staggering. For the first time in their respective histories, humans and orcs were facing the possibility of development beyond the limitations that had defined their evolution. Partnership wasn't just a survival strategy, it was a pathway to transformation. War Captain, Amelia said slowly, when your people first came to Earth, you were seeking a new home for a dying civilization. What you may have found instead is the foundation for an entirely new kind of civilization. Scarlog was quiet for a long moment, processing the weight of what they had discovered. Colonel, the 1,000-year war taught my people that survival requires strength, cunning, and the willingness to destroy anything that threatens your existence. But this partnership has taught us something different. Which is that survival might require cooperation, innovation, and the willingness to become something greater than what you were. Through the laboratory windows, they could see the construction crews working on the defense station, representatives of two species who had transformed from enemies to allies to something entirely unprecedented. The sight filled all three of them with a mixture of pride and anticipation. Earth had survived its first interstellar conflict. But more than that, it had become the birthplace of a new kind of interstellar relationship, one built on mutual enhancement rather than mutual destruction. The stars, which had once seemed like distant points of light in an empty universe, now seemed like destinations waiting to be explored by partners who had learned that together they could become more than the sum of their parts. Colonel Camerton Amelia had begun this war believing that victory meant the defeat of an alien invasion. She was ending it with the realization that true victory meant the creation of something that had never existed before, a civilization built by multiple species working together toward shared goals. The Iron Gate War was over. The Age of Alliance had begun. 5 years after the first Orc portal opened over the Cascade Mountains, Ambassador Camerton Amelia stood on the bridge of the starship Unity, watching through the viewports as humanity's first joint human-orc interstellar expedition approached the coordinates of a distant world that might harbor intelligent life. Captain Scarlog, promoted from war captain to the first Orc starship commander, stood beside her, studying sensor readings that showed a planet remarkably similar to pre-war Korthak. Energy signatures suggest advanced civilization, he reported. But no signs of active conflict. Perhaps we will find a species that learned cooperation before disaster forced it upon them. Or perhaps, Amelia replied, we'll find a species that needs what we learned from each other. Behind them, the bridge crew, equal numbers of humans and orcs working with the seamless coordination that had become the hallmark of their alliance, prepared for first contact protocols that emphasized partnership over conquest, understanding over dominance. The ship itself was a marvel of combined engineering. Human precision manufacturing and computer systems integrated with orc power sources and defensive technologies. Exploration rather than conquest as its primary mission. Diplomacy rather than warfare as its primary tool. Contact in 30 minutes, reported Lieutenant Chen, Dr. Sarah Chen's daughter, who had grown up in the integrated colonies and spoke both languages with native fluency. Incoming transmission on standard galactic frequencies. On screen, Amelia and Scarlog said simultaneously, then shared the gesture of mutual amusement that had become their trademark. The view screen activated to show beings that were neither human nor orc, but unmistakably intelligent. Four-armed, silver-skinned, with large eyes that suggested either curiosity or wariness. Unknown vessel. Came the transmission, translated by the ship's computer into both English and Orcish. You have entered the territory of the Confederation of Free Worlds. Please state your intentions. Amelia stepped forward to respond, but Scarlog placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a gesture that would have been impossible during their first encounters, but had become natural through years of partnership. Together, he said simply. Together, she agreed. They faced the viewscreen side by side, human and orc united in purpose. Confederation of Free Worlds. Amelia began. This is Ambassador Amelia of the Terra Nyanjo Alliance. We come seeking friendship, knowledge, and the possibility of mutual benefit between our peoples. We are explorers, not conquerors, Scarlog added. We have learned that the greatest strength comes not from dominating others, but from working together towards shared goals. We offer our friendship and hope to learn of your wisdom. The silver-skinned beings on the screen consulted among themselves in rapid, musical tones. When they turned back to the camera, their large eyes seemed to hold something that might have been hope. Terranianjo Alliance, came the response. We welcome you to our space. We are curious to learn how two species achieve the cooperation that has eluded so many others. It's a long story, Amelia said with a smile. But we have time. As the Unity moved into orbit around the New World, its crew prepared for the delicate work of diplomacy, cultural exchange, and the building of relationships that might someday span the galaxy. Behind them, Earth continued its transformation into a world where multiple species worked together to solve problems that no single people could address alone. The Iron Gate War had ended with the discovery that enemies could become allies. But the greater discovery, that allies could become something entirely new, was still just beginning. In the depths of space, among worlds that might harbor friends not yet met, the age of cooperation was expanding beyond a single planet to embrace possibilities that no species had ever imagined alone. The stars waited, patient and full of promise, for the children of two worlds who had learned to reach for them together.